A single courtroom moment just sent shockwaves through American politics for the first time ever. A judge openly questioned whether a former president can escape criminal charges simply by claiming immunity. Let that sink in. If this claim had worked, it would have meant any president could break the law and walk away untouched. That idea didn't just raise eyebrows. It stopped the courtroom cold. What happened next stunned everyone watching. As lawyers argued that Donald Trump should be protected from prosecution forever, the judge pushed back hard. Questions came fast. The logic began to crack. And within minutes, what was supposed to be a shield started to look like a legal trap closing in real time. Here's the unsettling part. This case isn't just about one man. It's about power, accountability, and whether the law still applies at the very top. Stay with me, because the next 10 reasons explain exactly why this immunity claim didn't just fail. It collapsed live in court. At the heart of the courtroom, shock was a simple but devastating truth. Nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it say a president is above the law. Not one sentence, not one clause. The judge made it clear that immunity is not a magic shield, and it certainly isn't unlimited. The Constitution was written to restrict power, not excuse it. The framers feared kings, tyrants, and unchecked authority, which is exactly why they built a system based on accountability and balance, not blind protection. The judge pressed the argument to its breaking point. If a president has absolute immunity, then what stops him from committing crimes while in office and simply walking away afterward? The courtroom went quiet as this logic unraveled. The judge emphasized that immunity has always been narrow, designed only to protect legitimate presidential duties, not personal, political, or criminal actions. Claiming otherwise, the judge suggested, would rewrite the Constitution in a way it was never intended to be read. This is where the immunity argument truly collapsed. The court made it clear that Donald Trump was asking for something unprecedented, lifetime protection from criminal law, even as a private citizen. The judge rejected that outright. The Constitution gives presidents power, not permanent immunity. And once that distinction was made on the record, the foundation of Trump's defense cracked. Because if the Constitution doesn't grant absolute immunity, and it doesn't, then everything built on that, claims starts to fall apart fast. One of the most damaging moments in court came when the judge drew a hard line between what a president is allowed to do and what a president is never allowed to do. The argument from Trump's legal team suggested that anything connected to the presidency could be protected as an official act. The judge didn't just question that idea, they dismantled it. An official duty means governing the country, enforcing laws, and carrying out constitutional responsibilities. It does not mean committing crimes and calling them presidential business. The judge pressed this point with a simple but chilling question. If a president commits a crime while in office, does that magically turn into an official act? The courtroom tension spiked because the answer is obviously no. Crimes don't become legal just because power is involved. The judge emphasized that actions taken for personal gain, political survival, or self-protection fall completely outside the scope of legitimate presidential duties. That distinction alone stripped away a massive part of the immunity claim. This is where the defense truly stumbled. By trying to label alleged criminal conduct as official, Donald Trump was essentially asking the court to erase the difference between leadership and law-breaking. The judge made it clear that accepting that logic would open the door for abuse at the highest level, allowing presidents to commit crimes under the cover of authority. That's why the court pushed back so forcefully. Presidential power exists to serve the public, not to shield personal wrongdoing. And once that line was drawn, the immunity argument lost even more ground. Another moment that clearly shifted the courtroom was when the judge pointed to long-standing Supreme Court precedent. None of it supported Trump's argument. Time and time again, the highest court in the country has made one thing clear. Presidents are not above the law. The judge emphasized that immunity has never been interpreted as a permanent shield against criminal accountability. In fact, past rulings consistently reinforce the idea that legal scrutiny does not disappear just because someone holds powerful office. What made this especially damaging was how calmly and confidently the judge referenced these precedents. There was no uncertainty. The message was blunt. The courts have already answered this question. Even sitting presidents can be investigated, subpoenaed, and compelled to cooperate with the justice system. And once a president leaves office, that protection becomes even weaker, not stronger. The judge highlighted that Trump's legal team wasn't asking the court to follow precedent. They were asking it to ignore it entirely. That's where the argument began to unravel fast. By pushing for absolute immunity, Donald Trump wasn't relying on established law. He was asking for a brand new legal doctrine that courts have repeatedly rejected. The judge made it clear that courts don't invent protections just because a defendant is powerful or famous. They follow precedent. And in this case, precedent sends a clear message. Presidential power has limits. Criminal law still applies. And immunity has never meant total escape from accountability. Once that reality was laid out in open court, the immunity claim didn't just weaken, it lost its legal footing altogether. One of the judge's most powerful points was also one of the simplest. Presidential immunity does not follow someone for life. The court made it clear that whatever limited protections exist while a president is in office are tied to the position, not the person. Once the oath ends and the term is over, the authority and the protections end with it. The judge emphasized that the law does not recognize a special class of former leaders who remain untouchable forever. This struck at the core of the defense strategy. Trump's legal team argued as if holding the presidency once grants permanent legal insulation. Even years later, the judge pushed back hard, noting that no public office in America works that way. Governors don't keep immunity after leaving office. Judges don't, members of Congress don't, and presidents don't either. The idea that a former president could return to private life yet still avoid prosecution would create two justice systems, one for powerful elites and one for everyone else. That's why this moment mattered so much. By stressing Trump's current status as a private citizen, the judge removed the emotional weight of the presidency from the equation. In the eyes of the court, Donald Trump is no longer protected by the office he once held. He stands before the law like anyone else. That single clarification collapsed a major pillar of the immunity claim because once immunity ends with the presidency, the defense loses its foundation and the case moves forward, not as a political dispute, but as a straightforward legal reckoning under the same rules that apply to everyone. This was one of the most dramatic moments in the courtroom because the judge didn't just reject the immunity argument, they warned about its consequences. The judge made it clear that accepting Trump's claim would effectively create a king-like presidency, something the American system was designed to prevent. If a president could claim immunity for criminal acts, then the law would stop at the Oval Office door. And that, the judge emphasized, is dangerous. The reasoning was chillingly simple. If immunity were absolute, a president could commit crimes while in office, obstruction, fraud, even violence, and face zero accountability once their term ends. The judge stressed that the Constitution was written specifically to avoid this outcome. America rejected monarchy, rejected royal privilege, and rejected the idea that leaders rule without consequences. The courtroom felt the weight of that history as the judge explained that the law must apply especially to those with the most power, not least. This is where the argument truly collapsed under its own weight. By asking for total immunity, Donald Trump wasn't just defending himself, he was asking the court to redefine the presidency itself. The judge made it clear that courts exist to prevent that kind of power grab. Immunity is meant to protect democracy, not override it. And the moment the judge framed the issue as a threat to the constitutional system, the defense lost more than legal ground, it lost moral credibility. Because no judge wants to be remembered as the one who turned the American president into something the founders fought, a revolution to escape. One of the most damaging ironies highlighted in court was that this sweeping immunity claim directly contradicts Trump. As on past arguments, the judge made it clear that legal positions don't exist in a vacuum. Courts, remember what defendants have said before. In earlier disputes, Trump publicly and legally argued that presidents can be investigated, questioned, and held accountable. Now, faced with criminal exposure, that stance suddenly vanished. The judge didn't miss the contradiction. This matters because courts value consistency and credibility. You can't argue one standard when it benefits you, then demand the opposite when the consequences change. The judge pointed out that Trump once criticized presidents for hiding behind power, insisting that wrongdoing should be exposed no matter who commits it, and those statements weren't political talking points anymore. They became legal evidence of hypocrisy, and hypocrisy weakens trust, especially when asking a court for extraordinary protection. That contradiction severely undercut the defense. By reversing himself, Donald Trump wasn't just making a legal argument. He was revealing that the immunity claim is convenient, not principled. The judge made it clear that immunity can be stretched or shrunk depending on who's on trial. The law doesn't bend to personal survival. Once the court exposed that Trump's current position conflicts with his own past reasoning, it became even harder to take the immunity claim seriously. Because when your argument collapses under your own words, the court doesn't need to guess intent. It sees it plainly. Another key reason the immunity claim collapsed is that the judge made a clear distinction between political arguments and legal responsibility. Trump's defense repeatedly framed the case as a political attack, suggesting the prosecution was driven by bias or revenge. The judge stopped that narrative cold. Courts don't rule on feelings, elections, or popularity. They rule on law. And the law asks one question only: did a crime occur, and does the court have the authority to examine it? The judge emphasized that the prosecutors representing the United States Department of Justice are not putting a president on trial for politics. They're enforcing criminal statutes that apply to everyone. The court stressed that claiming political motivation does not erase evidence or cancel jurisdiction. If that argument worked, any powerful figure could avoid prosecution by simply calling a case unfair. The judge made it clear that the justice system would collapse if courts allowed politics to override accountability. This reasoning dealt another heavy blow to Trump's immunity strategy by leaning on political outrage instead of legal grounding. Donald Trump failed to address the core issue. Immunity does not block criminal review. The judge reinforced that accountability is not optional, and it doesn't disappear because a case is controversial. The courtroom message was unmistakable. No one gets a special exemption just because their prosecution is uncomfortable or unprecedented. Once the judge reframed the case as a matter of law rather than politics, the immunity argument lost its emotional leverage. What remained was a legal question with a clear answer. Criminal law applies, and the court has both the authority and the obligation to enforce it. One of the judge's clearest messages was that immunity was never meant to block criminal accountability altogether. The court emphasized that immunity exists to prevent harassment or interference with legitimate presidential decision-making, not to erase consequences for criminal conduct. The judge made it plain: immunity is a procedural safeguard, not a personal escape hatch. It can delay certain actions while someone is in office, but it does not cancel the law itself. The judge walked through why this distinction matters so much. If immunity automatically stopped prosecutors from even investigating a former president, then criminal law would become optional for the most powerful people in the country. The court rejected that logic outright. Judges don't grant immunity to avoid inconvenience, embarrassment, or political fallout. They grant it only when it serves the functioning of government. And once that purpose is gone, so is the protection. Turning immunity into a permanent shield, the judge warned, would destroy its original intent. This is where the defense hit another wall by treating immunity like a lifelong pardon. Donald Trump was asking the court to transform a limited legal concept into total protection from prosecution. The judge refused. The court stressed that America already has mechanisms for mercy, pardons, sentencing discretion, appeals, but blanket immunity is not one of them. Criminal law still exists, evidence still matters, and courts still have a duty to act. Once the judge made it clear that immunity does not equal immunity from justice, the argument lost even more force. Because when immunity stops being a tool of governance and becomes a tool of avoidance, courts step in, and that's exactly what happened here. This is the moment that truly shocked the courtroom. Instead of quietly reserving judgment, the judge openly challenged the immunity claim in real time, forcing the defense to confront its flaws on the spot. Judges are often restrained during arguments, but here the questions were sharp, direct, and impossible to dodge. Each answer from the defense seemed to raise an even bigger problem, and the tension in the room was unmistakable. What was supposed to be a confident legal shield began to look like a collapsing structure under public scrutiny. The judge's live questioning exposed the core weakness of the argument. It relied on assumptions, not law. When asked to explain where this sweeping immunity actually comes from, the defense struggled. There was no constitutional text, no controlling case, no clear legal boundary. The judge repeatedly pushed for specifics. Where does it end? What crimes are excluded? Who decides? Each unanswered question made the claim feel less like a legal principle and more like a desperate reach for protection. That public unraveling mattered. Courts don't just decide cases, they send signals. By challenging the logic so openly, the judge signaled deep skepticism, not neutrality. For Donald Trump, this was devastating. Legal arguments depend on clarity and restraint, and the immunity claim had neither once the judge began dissecting it aloud. The live nature of the exchange removed any illusion of strength. Viewers, reporters, and legal observers all saw the same thing at the same time. The court was not persuaded, and when a judge starts dismantling an argument on the record, it's often a sign that the outcome is already moving in a very dangerous direction for the defense. The final reason the immunity claim collapsed is also the most serious. Accepting it would fundamentally break the American justice system. The judge made it clear that courts don't just rule on individual cases. They protect the integrity of the law as a whole. If a former president could permanently block criminal prosecution by citing past authority, then the legal system would instantly lose its credibility. Laws would still exist on paper, but enforcement would depend on status, not conduct. The judge emphasized the dangerous precedent this would create. Every future president could point to this ruling and argue that criminal behavior is untouchable as long as it happened near power. Investigations would stall, prosecutors would be powerless, courts would be forced to look away. Even when evidence is clear, the judge warned that this would hollow out the rule of law from the inside, creating a system where accountability stops at the top. That's not justice, that's exemption. This is why the court couldn't accept the argument. No matter how historic or politically sensitive the case may be, granting immunity here would mean rewriting how justice works in America. It would tell the public that some people are simply too powerful to be judged. The judge made it clear that this is not how the system was designed to function and never will be for Donald Trump. This meant the final pillar of the defense collapsed completely. Because once a claim threatens the foundation of the legal system itself, courts don't compromise, they reject it. And in doing so, the judge sent the strongest message of all: no title, past or present, is greater than the law.